When you look at what was reached, this memorandum of understanding between Iran and the U.S., what does the MOU lock in, and what still depends on even more talks?
Yeah, thank you for having me. So what this does is it basically hits the rewind button. It takes us to where we were when the conflict, the day before the conflict started, ending the fighting and essentially reopening the Strait of Hormuz to basically the status quo pre-conflict. What it does not do is it does not take us forward. Forward meaning it doesn't address the issues that President Trump leaned on when he initiated the strikes back in February. Number one, ending Iran's nuclear enrichment program, including removing the remaining outstanding enriched uranium that's there. Number two, ending its ballistic missile program, and we've seen to what devastating effect that program can cause. And three, ending its support for proxy groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. Those three elements, those three components are still outstanding and basically kicked down the road for another 60 days or so. So all this does is really just hit the reset button, but it does not move us forward.
Yeah, you mentioned a number of outstanding issues being kicked down the road. You talked about Iran's proxy group. So let's dig into that further in regards to Lebanon. We have just come through a very tense period with Israeli strikes on Hezbollah in Lebanon that was testing what was in place, the ceasefire. Now we have this MOU. Should we be expecting those strikes to stop, or is there still room for limited action?
Well, from the Israeli perspective, and especially for Prime Minister Netanyahu, he does not find himself in a political position where his hands can be tied by this MOU between Iran and the United States. The Israelis still believe Hezbollah poses a threat on its northern border. Hezbollah has continued to fire rockets and launch attacks across the border, and Israel maintains it has that right to respond, including going into the southern suburbs of Beirut, which are a Hezbollah stronghold, and we've seen what casualties that's resulted. So, so long as this issue remains linked to Lebanon, which is what Iran is maintaining, it makes it difficult because there are three parties to this conflict, but only two parties to the MOU. So again, all of this is vague, and it's difficult to see how any violation of this will be dealt with if Hezbollah decides it is going to fire or launch an attack. If Israel retaliates, does this annul the MOU? Does this cancel the whole thing outright? We don't know.
Yeah, as you point out, there are only two parties in the MOU, Israel and as well as Iran's proxies. They are not included in this deal. Let's talk about the Iran nuclear issue next. Now, the MOU, it triggers a sort of technical discussion on some of the hardest issues, including Iran's nuclear program. What are the most contentious points of that file, and why are they so hard to resolve?
Well, the hardest issue is going to be preventing Iran from becoming a nuclear breakout or threshold state. What does that mean? That means not only removing the enriched uranium that is there, but preventing Iran from being able to enrich in the future to a similar threshold that puts nations nearby at risk from a possible nuclear strike. And that means that effectively dismantling Iran's nuclear program, getting rid of its centrifuges, capping what it can do, limiting it to civilian grade levels of uranium enrichment, and having the very intrusive inspection regime needed to make sure that's the case. Iran has not indicated it is going to agree to any of those terms or conditions whatsoever. And beyond that, you still have in Iran the knowledge, the technical knowledge, the scientific knowledge to reconstitute and restart this program at any point in the future. So, I mean, it's not like the deal is saying, let's get rid of the scientists. Let's burn all the manuals and all the guides that instruct them on how to restart these centrifuges or reconstruct them. All of that knowledge, that hard knowledge and that soft knowledge is still there. And the agreement doesn't indicate what that pathway is going to look like, or that Iran's even going to agree to any of that.
And there are also question marks about the fate of the Strait of Hormuz. Donald Trump says, and this was an interview that he gave shortly after the news broke, he said that the agreement ensures that the Strait of Hormuz will be, quote, permanently toll-free. But really? I mean, so your thoughts on the Strait, and again, which was not controlled before the war, how is it going to be managed from here on out?
Yeah, it's going to be permanently open until it isn't permanently open. And by that, I mean, if Iran perceives that it's being threatened in some way, if it perceives there is a violation of the terms of the MOU in some capacity, and these disagreements happen, one side thinks there's a violation, the other side thinks it does not have a violation, in which case then would Iran trigger or invoke some clause in the MOU that gives it the right to close the strait or to essentially put mines near its part of the strait or to move rockets and other threatening munitions along the coast, threatening ships passing through there. Again, Iran doesn't physically need to do anything. It just needs to signal that for maritime traffic to effectively stop, for insurers to not be willing to insure cargo vessels going through. And that would effectively close the strait, even without Iran having to do anything physical. Merely it's just the threat or the fear of such action that would be enough to close traffic. Nothing here indicates that Iran won't revert to that in the future.
And I want to get sort of wide lens view of this moment, because this feels like a big moment, but it's also an area we've circled around before. It fits this pattern of sort of fragile deals, fragile truces. So what is different this time that might make this, in fact, an enduring, lasting peace?
So I want to be optimistic, but as I look at this, I don't see anything here that indicates a pathway towards peace. What it indicates is a solution to stop the immediate fighting. So basically that means threats regarding the Strait of Hormuz, of cargo vessels and other ships passing through the area, of ballistic missiles raining down into cities in the Gulf, into Israel, into other U.S. and regional allies, and things of that nature that put U.S. service members at risk. Those will stop, presumably under this MOU. But that ending fighting is not the same as a pathway to peace. That second part involves serious diplomacy, real negotiations, and it seems that on the issues that both sides have to negotiate on, they are far apart. So they can stop fighting, but that doesn't mean that they're going to then agree on the next steps that would bring about a lasting, enduring peace. On that second part, I think we should remain skeptical until really signals are given by both sides and major steps and concessions are given to move in that direction. We have not seen that yet.
Yeah, you want to be optimistic, but a number of outstanding issues have been kicked down the road. More serious diplomacy is needed at this moment. Benjamin Radd, we appreciate your analysis. Thank you so much. Take care.